Hey you guys, my name is Jessica and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and you can learn all about me on my website at jessicadogert.com.
What's going on, everybody? It's Marisa Moon. I'm a certified Primal health coach and intermittent fasting instructor. You can learn more about me at marisamoon.com. So this is episode number 40, you guys, and we have a pretty notable guest, Dr. Stephen Hussey, the heart coach from resourceyourhealth.com, and he's the author of the revolutionary new holistic health book called The Health Evolution: Why Understanding Evolution is the Key to Vibrant Health.
So after discovering his passion for health in college, Stephen obtained his doctorate in chiropractic medicine and master's in human nutrition and functional medicine from the University of Western States. And over the years, he has learned the power of food to heal the body, and it all began when he used the proper human diet as part of the healing process to just rid himself of many chronic health ailments. And today he practices chiropractic and functional medicine in Virginia, and he coaches people who have a variety of health concerns, especially heart trouble. And due to his firsthand experience, he also specializes in helping people with type 1 diabetes.
I just started reading Stephen's book, you guys, and it really sings to my soul. Evolutionary science has a lot to do with my beliefs in nutrition and well-being, and no matter what your current beliefs are, listeners, you might feel the same way at the end of this episode. Welcome to the show, Dr. Stephen.
Welcome.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to get started.
Sweet. I mean, from your book, The Health Evolution, you say that readers will learn why most chronic disease is not genetic, the truth behind why our society is suffering from disease, how our epidemic of disease directly relates to the health of the planet, strategies to right the ship, achieve better health, and save our species. That sounds like a pretty big undertaking, I've got to say. Tell us what led you to write such a monstrous, impactful topic.
Well, I mean, it really boils down to life experience. So when I was a child, very young age, I think my parents noticed at age 2, I was having trouble, I was wheezing and coughing and doing things like that. I had lots of allergies, diagnosed with asthma, used to break out in chronic hives, like huge hives all over my body. I ended up with the autoimmune disease, type 1 diabetes. And so because of that, my parents and I relied on Western medicine to help me through those things. And they were very good at managing the symptoms that came along with those. But I never got explanations for why, and things kind of continued to get worse. And so as I grew up, especially when I went to college and was doing things on my own, I started to realize that I guess the way I lived my life and the food I ate and the stress I experienced had an impact on these things. And so that led me down to a path of professional medical degree, functional medicine master's degree, really looking for the answers to why my body reacted the way that it did and why my friends' bodies didn't. And so I think that functional medicine and just a medical degree in general gave me a lot of answers, but it was still very focused on diagnosis. It was, all these symptoms and exam findings and blood work findings, that led us to the diagnosis. So it was very focused on that. And without the diagnosis, we didn't know what to do. And emotional medicine was a little bit better. It wasn't so focused on the diagnosis. It was more focused on imbalances and why this is happening. But I became very interested in why those imbalances were there. And it didn't quite lead me. I did a lot of searching, but I eventually really honed in on evolution, and it gave me the answers that I wanted. And I wanted to share those answers with the world. And so I wrote this book down to get those answers out there.
I'm glad you wrote this book.
That's very cool. You know what? You mentioned that you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at such a young age. And I'm sure for Western medicine, it's, you're insulin dependent, right? But what's your approach like in terms of functional medicine day in and day out?
Yeah, so I found it very curious that when I found out that diet had such a huge impact on me being able to manage those blood sugars, it was very curious that I had never heard that from any doctor ever. No one had ever told me that what I ate made a difference. All they said was, you can eat whatever you want, just give yourself more insulin.
Right.
And now we know that even with normal people who don't have type 1 diabetes, like we want insulin levels to be stable. And so the more I can do to my diet so that I didn't have to give myself as much insulin or make it more stable, the better it would be. And so now I remember, bolusing, which is giving myself insulin, up to 10 or 12 units per meal. And now I don't even bolus any, for a
Wow.
meal, because what I eat is just so low carbohydrate. And sometimes I will have carbs, but most of my meals are so low carbohydrate I don't have to. My basal rate, which is just the rate that my pump gives me all day long, is enough. And so I went from, upwards of 100 units a day, maybe not quite that much, maybe like 80, to like now he's an average of like 20, 24 units a day. So very easy to control.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm happy for you. Real quick before we move on, you guys, I wanted to have you, Dr. Hussey, explain briefly what type 1 diabetes is and also what functional medicine is.
Yeah, so diabetes, there's two types. So there's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 used to be called like juvenile onset because we saw it more happening in kids. But now even some adults are getting diagnosed with type 1. Like my brother was 22 and he was diagnosed. He's also type 1 diabetic.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And we knew exactly what was going on when it was happening because of my experiences. And then there's type 2, which is more, I guess, kind of metabolic syndrome. So it's more like insulin resistance. Your body is making insulin, but your body's not responding to it. Whereas in type 1, I'm not making insulin at all anymore. And so type 1 is considered an autoimmune disease, which means my body attacked part of itself, the specific part being the islet cells or the islets of Langerhans cells in my pancreas that make insulin. And so they don't work anymore. Although I have seen some things that show that potentially they may not be dead, they just may be prevented from doing their job. So I still have hope that I can turn them back on one day, but I don't know. Whereas in type 2, it's almost like the receptors to insulin for people's cells has gotten so overworked that they went on strike. That's kind of how I explain it. And so you can secrete all the insulin you want, you're not going to respond to it. And then eventually your body gets so tired of secreting the insulin that it stops secreting insulin. And so it's mainly due to the types of diets that we're eating in Westernized society that's driving up blood sugars and causing your body to have to do all this work that eventually gets tired. So that's the difference, type 1 and type 2. And then functional medicine is, I think of it as like a reaction to Western medicine, because Western medicine is not working as well as we would like it to. And people in Western medicine may not be so ready to admit that it's not working as well as it would be, but it's not. And so I think doctors and other practitioners have gotten frustrated with the results they're getting. And I think functional medicine has come from that. Okay, so it's really looking at why is this happening. I'm not just looking at what it is as far as like getting a diagnosis, analyzing symptoms and exam findings and things like that and figuring out what it is, but figuring out why it's there. As we figure out why it's there, maybe we can change the person's environment to alter their health outcome. And then I like to say that I took it a step further and said, why do those imbalances happen in the first place, which is why the book came along.
Thank you.
Very cool. I have one more question, if you don't mind, in terms of type 1 diabetes. So you said that your brother was diagnosed when he was 22, and you said your family knew right away that, that's what it was. What was he experiencing, or how did you know exactly that it was type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, so I can't remember if he called me or if my mom called me and told me that he had called her, but it was basically he was, drinking gallons of water at a time, up all night peeing, very, very thirsty, very dry mouth. And it had been a couple of weeks of that. And we said, well, go to the hospital. And then me and my dad drove down that night to the hospital to be with him. So it was pretty clear what it was to me. Although for him, he could have just thought, oh, I'm dehydrated. But we knew what it was. And then I believe then when he got to the hospital, there was ketones in his urine because his body was being forced to burn fat, which ketones are not a bad thing. They're obviously a very good thing, but ketoacidosis, when your body has no choice but to burn ketones, that's a bad thing. And so he had ketones in his urine when he got to the hospital. His blood sugar was pretty high, so it was pretty obvious then.
Very interesting. So In your book, you explain that misinformation about health has created a healthcare system based on false information and has left the general public lacking the knowledge and tools necessary to lead a life that creates optimal health. So, can you better explain to our listeners how the American healthcare system could possibly be based on so much false information? So, in a nutshell, if you could, because this could be a really new reality check for so many people right here in this moment.
Yeah. I'll try and keep it simple, but it goes back a long way. So if we're looking at the, the start of Western medicine, it was kind of started when John Rockefeller, he was a good businessman. He had all this oil at his disposal and he was looking for ways to use it. And he found that it could be used to extract ingredients from certain plants to concentrate them. And so that was kind of the birth of these medications, this huge pharmaceutical industry that we have today. And so what he did, though, and I don't think he thought he was doing anything bad. I think he was just being a businessman. He approached all the medical schools, or a lot of the medical schools, and said that he would help fund them if they taught his curriculum of using these pharmaceuticals that he was making. And so things just kind of built on that. And now we have this very pharmaceutical-based medical system. And I think that it's not that anybody was evil or diabolically designing this whole thing. It's just that we're in a capitalist society, and you look for ways to use your money to make more money. Every company is watching their bottom dollar, but that puts a huge conflict of interest in our Western medical system, because what we see is we have practitioners, we have insurance companies, and we have pharmaceutical companies. And the pharmaceutical companies are funding the education of the practitioners, medical doctors. And so obviously they're not going to fund a curriculum that would encourage them to cure the diseases that they're without medications, that their medications would use. And that's, again, not evil or diabolical. It's just that they're watching out for the bottom line. They're trying to sell products. And then we have the practitioners who are diagnosing the patients based on what they're going to get paid for. And so if they don't have a diagnosis to give to the insurance company's not going to pay them. So the insurance companies are only going to pay for the treatments that have been so-called researched and clinically backed through research. And so when the pharmaceutical companies are funding most of the research, then the research is showing that the drugs are the best thing. And so we get this kind of trifecta that's happening. And again, it's just a bunch of people doing their jobs, living in a capitalist society. But what's happening is that the money is flowing through that trifecta and the patients are not getting better. And so we have to assess that. And I think as a society, look at that system and be like, okay, it's not working. And then be brave enough to say, okay, what else can we do? And, throw the bottom dollar or the bottom line out the window and say, we got to get people better first. And so the other interesting thing is that I mentioned that pharmaceutical companies are funding most of the research. And so they're throwing a lot of money into this research because it's very expensive to do clinical trials. And they're not going to fund trials that they don't think are going to be favorable to their product. And so we get we've learned a lot about biochemistry from pharmaceutical research, which is awesome. But they're only really going to fund the trials that they think are going to turn out good for their product. And there's actually a lot of interesting research through a guy named Ben Goldaker, and he's showing that the large percentage of the clinical trials that don't end up the way they want them to, they don't publish them. So if I go into PubMed and want to figure out what's the best way to treat some condition, but not all the research that was done on that condition or that drug was published, then I'm not getting an accurate representation of how it works. I'm almost getting a more positive outcome, or the research is more positive for that drug when it really shouldn't be. Maybe it's 50-50 or something. So lots of conflicts of interest there, but I think that was a nutshell. I'm not sure.
Thank you. It makes me wonder if this might be a good place for you to explain to our listeners, how could it be possible that their doctor, who they trust and who cares for them, maybe their primary care doctor, or even someone like their cardiologist who specializes in their heart health, how could their doctor not have the answers? How does that system and all of the basically from where it began, how does all of that lead to a physician not knowing the answers?
Yeah. I think that medical school is very good at teaching, medical students about, the body itself, anatomy, physiology, the things that we know. But when it comes to, again, the why, it's not really good at teaching them that. I mean, first of all, there's almost no nutrition classes in medical school, in most medical schools. I think some of them are starting to have some now, but again, that's a reaction to what people are wanting, what society is wanting. And so they're not, it's just the training. I mean, doctors are smart people, obviously. They go through that rigorous program, but they're trained in a way that's very limiting. And we've kind of put this stigma around doctors that they do know everything, or they should know everything. And so, but I think that what we're seeing, and I think the reason that functional medicine's become popular is because not only are doctors frustrated with not getting results, but patients are getting frustrated too. And so they're looking somewhere else because they go to, they get second, third, fourth opinions and get 4 or 5 different answers. And so it's very clear that what doctors are learning in medical school is not the only way for it to be done. And so I think that people are starting to educate themselves, which is very, very important, because that's kind of what a capitalist society predisposes us to. We work really good or really hard at our job, this one thing that we do, but we outsource everything else, including our health. And it's been outsourced to the medical profession. And when the results aren't happening, or when it's actually when it's killing people the way that it is, because I think that's over almost 600,000 deaths per year associated with our Western medical system. So that makes it, I believe, the leading cause of death in the country, besides behind or in front of heart disease and cancer. So we really have to step back and ask ourselves if what we're doing, if the way we're practicing medicine should be practiced this way, and look at the results. Because people all the time say to me, well, if that was the case, then all the doctors should know about it, and it's not the case. I think a good example in a different field is like Bill Gates. He dropped out of college, and he does not have any type of, I don't know if he ever went back, but when he started this company and became this expert, he didn't have any college degree. And so, but I would go to him today and ask him business advice or computer advice. He'd be like one of the number one guys if I had access to him to do that. So just because someone has a degree in something doesn't mean they know everything. And just because someone doesn't have a degree doesn't mean they know nothing. And I think that we need to start looking for different places in our world for health answers. That's why I named my website Resource Your Health, find new sources of health.
That's good to know. Well, one thing I'd like to address before we get into some of your just philosophical and practical theories from the book is the actual topic of evolution. You probably knew what you were going up against just by using the word evolution in your title and in your subtitle. And I was happy to see that addressed early on in your book. And you stated that there's a lot of evolution talk in this book. Since I realize that not everyone agrees with this particular theory, I have a favor to ask. If you do not accept the theory of evolution, please do not dismiss the overall message of the book. You do not have to change your beliefs to benefit from the information or parts of the book that can help people achieve health and create a better world.
Yeah. So just as I said there, like to get a result or get a better health outcome from what I recommend in the book, you do not have to believe in evolution. But I think evolution and religion go nicely together. But I think it goes back to what I was talking about with Bill Gates. Just because someone doesn't have something that would say they know something about this subject, just because evolution says something different than what you believe, or vice versa, if religion says something different than what evolution is saying, it doesn't mean we can't benefit from the information it has to offer. We don't, like I said, we don't have to change the beliefs, but I really just think it means be open-minded. I think that you're never going to find answers if you rabbit hole yourself and looking at the same information over and over and over again, or only, I think that like Instagram is a perfect example of this. You can follow all the people that say what you think or agree with you in your thinking, and then you're just going to go down this rabbit hole and be almost dogmatic in the way you think. Whereas, or you could like all these people that have different opinions than you and take from them what you can learn from them, not knowing that you're not going to start believing in what they believe, but at least you're getting a different perspective. You're seeing more diversity, and that's really good for your brain. But it's also, I think it keeps people open-minded.
Well, I know why the topic of evolution is so important in relation to our health, but I know this is like a totally new concept. Words like ancestral health, fields of study like evolutionary science are completely new to a lot of people today. And when you first hear about it, if you are strong in the field of Christianity and your beliefs and spirituality, you might feel conflicted. But I was pleased to see that there's a big world out there on the internet combining Christianity and evolutionary beliefs. It's often referred to as evolutionary creationism. And anyone listening that's interested in that theology would be interested in seeing biologos.org. It's biologos.org. It's their mission to share the belief that science and Christianity can support each other. So just wanted to let everybody know.
I totally agree. I think that in a way, religion came from evolution, because if you look at what humans were doing before we, or I guess as we came together in societies and formed civilizations, like the traits that were selected for, the ones that survived to further generations, were ones that were the people that were more likely to come together and form a community. And so lots of times they had common beliefs in that community. And I think that was kind of the birth of religion, as well as people looking for answers for why the world was the way it was. But if you look at it in that sense, it means that we evolved to come together in communities and have common beliefs. And so I think that since evolution is such a slow process, that it's very important for us to recognize that that's how we evolved, and that since that's the way it is, and that I'm not going to change as an individual, maybe generations down the line, humans would change, but I'm not going to, then it's very important for me to nourish that aspect of my physiology, my health, that need for community or a belief in something greater than yourself, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a religious God. It could be nature. It could be whatever. But it's very important for health to nourish that aspect of things, because that's how we evolved. And so I'm definitely not against religion at all. I think it does a lot of great things for people, and I think it's necessary, or else we wouldn't do it.
Well, basically exactly like what you were saying. I mean, I don't know if I interpreted this right, but like there's so much more to health than like the food that we're eating and like the fitness activities that we're doing. It's about community and like having like a higher power than us, like whether that be religion or, you know, whatever that may be. I think it's really important to focus basically on the functional medicine or like that holistic approach too.
Yeah, we got to look at everything.
So you have 4 principles of evolution that, you know, when you understood them, gave you so much more clarity as to why you suffered from chronic disease as a child. Can you tell us what those 4 principles are?
Yeah, this is my favorite thing to talk about. So these 4 things. So these are just things, like you said, that when I came across them, or when I learned more about them, it gave me answers. So the first one is the idea of natural selection, which is something that Darwin, you know, people who quote Darwin say all the time, natural selection. And I had a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that an individual could literally change its characteristics to become different and more adapted to its environment. But that's because an individual can't do that. This happens over generations. So when I learned that,
can you just start from the very beginning? Like, what is natural selection? What are you talking about?
Yeah. So I'll get there.
Okay.
So natural selection. So if we're looking at any type of species living in its natural environment, there are lots of different things in that environment that Darwin would call selection pressures. So things that would influence what would happen in the next generation. Okay, and it does that by, I mean, let's give the example of like a peacock. Okay, so peacocks have these giant tail feathers, and they're trying to impress the females. Okay.
Sorry, I'm
remember,
laughing. I'm
and
laughing because I
I
used
remember
to raise
thinking that, like,
peacocks. It's so weird.
when I was a
Okay.
kid, like, oh, the pretty ones with the pretty tails, that's got to be the females. And when I learned that it was the males, I was like, what? You know, like,
Yeah.
why are they so pretty? And then the females are just like, they don't have these big tail feathers, you know? But it was because it to the females, it would represent two things. One, maybe more than that, but one of them is that they were good at finding food, enough food that they could develop this huge
Oh.
tail feathers, this presentation. So that was one thing. The second thing was that they could also get away from predators despite having this huge tail feather thing tied on the back of them. So they were, demonstrating fitness for the environment as well. And um, so they're more likely to get a mating partner when they're doing this. Okay. And so over time, the only peacocks that would be able to pass on their genes are the ones with the biggest tail feathers and the prettiest tail feathers. And so the other ones who didn't have pretty tail feathers would not get to pass on their genes. And so those ugly tail feathers or those small tail feather genes would not get passed on. So over generations, we end up with this bird with this huge tail feather display. And that's the characteristic of the peacock. Same with like the long tongue of an anteater. The longer the tongue, the easier it can get at food that's deep in a log or something. And so the longer, the ones who had the longer tongues were able to nourish themselves better and then pass on their genes because they survived. Whereas the other ones couldn't do that because either their tongues were too short, maybe they survived a little bit, but no mating partner selected them or whatever because they were malnourished. And so just over time, I mean, this is a very slow process, then that's how natural selection works. And so there's so many different selection pressures. It's not just one or two things, but that's just a basic example of what natural selection is. And so when I learned that, I was like, oh, that makes more sense. It's not like I could put myself in a new environment and eventually adapt to it, which is key. So that's the first one, natural selection. The second one is that as far as when people talk about evolution, they talk about us evolving from apes, but that's actually not what happened. So humans and apes evolved from a common ancestor. So a living thing that does not exist today anymore. It was, maybe you could call it a hybrid between us, but it was just something, we don't even know what it looked like really. We probably have some archaeological evidence of what it looked like skeletally, but we don't really know what it looked like on the outside. And then when a species, let's say we had a species in the same place, if they get divided or half of that group goes somewhere else, there's new selection pressures wherever they went. Okay, and so that can create two different species over time, which is why we have I think the African and the Sumerian orangutan. They look pretty much the same, but they're really different species, and they can't mate together because they were in different environments.
Wow.
They became included in different environments, and so that's what happened with this this ape or human ape or whatever it was way back in the day, and it got split, and so the one line eventually became orangutans and gorillas and chimps and bonobos and all those different species of apes. And then we became modern humans. Now, there was a lot of different species of pre-humans and then modern humans and pre-modern humans that came before us. And they branched off and died off. And then modern humans were the ones that, survived and came are here today. But it's just important to note that it wasn't like this direct lineage that happened, like from apes and then to human. There was all these branching off and dying of different species, and we see that in archaeological evidence. But it happened because of natural selection in different environments. So I think it's also very interesting to note that it wasn't linear because there's also evidence that lots of these species were existing at the same time. So there was many different species of human at the same time in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And the most notable one is modern humans and Neanderthals. The modern humans evolved in Africa, but the Neanderthals had already migrated out of Africa and were in Northern Europe. And so modern humans came out of Africa at some point and encountered the Neanderthals, and we think even bred with them because all of us have a percentage of Neanderthal DNA in us. So they were probably, different species, but able to breed, which I don't know if that classifies them maybe as almost the same species, but eventually we outcompeted them. We're not sure how, but they died off and we did not. So that's interesting.
I'm like 2% Neanderthal, according to 23andMe.
I think I'm like 3. So, right.
Cool. Wait, by the way, can you explain like briefly what kind of timeline you're talking about? How many millions, like at what pace do things evolve, and how could a species evolve to be a new species? How long is that?
That's point number 3. So perfect.
Oh.
Yeah, nice. So we're talking about the split from apes. We're talking about around 6 million years ago.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So to put that in context, like ancient Egypt was like 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. So a very, very long time ago.
Whoa.
Split from.
When were dinosaurs?
65 million years ago.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. So at least that's when they died. They were around before that.
Whoa.
Yeah. So the huge amounts of time here. So, and then we look at when modern humans evolved, we see the first modern humans, and it's somewhere between 200 to 300,000 years ago. They just found, I think last year, evidence of modern humans being around 300,000 years ago, somewhere in Morocco or something. And so quite a long time, okay, that modern humans have been here. Again, ancient Egypt, which you think of as super long ago, was only 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. And so if we look at how fast evolution, I think the best evidence we have for this is this. There was a Russian scientist named Dmitry Belyaev, and he started selectively breeding Arctic foxes up in Siberia for docile traits. So if they were more likely to come up to him or eat food out of his hand, he would take those, and then he would breed them with a male or a female that was also more likely to do that. So he was selecting for this docile behavior, and he did that generation after generation, and about 30 generations, because the reproductive cycle of a fox is way smaller than ours. I think it's maybe 2 months or something. So he did this, and about 30 generations, he started seeing changes. He started seeing that the behavior changed, but also he saw that they were losing like their wild characteristics. So their ears started to flop because they didn't have to be up, ready, listening to their environment for predators. Wow. They were living pretty much in domestication, and it was almost like they were favoring humans and what humans desire, because we like it when the ears flop and people think that's cute and things like that. But also they were losing like their fur coats color started to change because they didn't need to be camouflaged as much anymore. And so that shows us that it takes at least 30 generations, but that was very, very controlled natural selection. And that usually doesn't happen that way in nature. Also, it was with a species that reproduces pretty quickly. And so it can adapt a little bit quicker. If we have a long reproductive cycle like ours, like 9 months, or an elephant like 22 months, then it's very hard for that species to adapt very quickly because you need generations to do that, which is why bacteria are so resilient, because they can reproduce like every 30 minutes. And so they can split. They don't really reproduce some of them do, but they can, divide every 30 minutes. So if their environment changes, give them 30 minutes and they'll start to evolve. Whereas us, it takes a very long time. And so that leads me directly into point number 4, which is if the environment of a species changes too rapidly, there's no way that its physiology could evolve to cater to that environment. So we brought up the dinosaurs earlier. So they went extinct pretty quickly, and that's because something happened. I mean, there's debate about what it was, whether a meteor hit the Earth or the Earth decided to erupt all its volcanoes at one time. The environment changed so quickly that there's no way they could have survived, because the reproductive cycle was not long enough to give them time to adapt to that new environment. Okay, and so if we apply that to humans and we apply that to our chronic disease epidemic, I would say that our environment's changing quickly, not quickly enough to kill us like it did to the dinosaurs, but quickly enough to cause us ailments. Our bodies are clearly struggling in this environment that we live in. Some of us are more adapted to it, our genes are more hardy to it than others. And that's why we see this difference in health. We all know the person that drinks and smokes till they're 100 and they're fine. We also know the people who are the kids who have cancer. So it's just, there's a huge variation. But the point is that our environments, our way of life is changing so rapidly, rapidly enough to cause us symptoms. So we need to think about how can we go back within the confines of modern day society.
When you say environment, can you tell our audience what you mean by that?
Yeah, so most people, when I say environment, would think, nature or the natural parks, things like that. But I'm talking about your personal environment, what your body comes into contact with every day, the toxins, the food you eat, the stress you experience, the relationships you have, that environment. If that changes, the things that your body is exposed to every single day changes too rapidly, it can't adapt to those things.
Give us a few examples of what has changed so rapidly today.
Yeah, so there's 5 imbalances that I think of in the body that are clear indicators that our environment is changing too rapidly. Okay, so the first one is food. That's most people know that if you eat better, you're going to experience better health. It's just all this confusion and all this information about what's the best way to eat. So if we look at around 10,000 years ago, which is kind of the dawn of civilizations, when it first started showing up and humans started coming together in communities and started farming. I think that's the biggest change our diet saw from modern humans 300,000 years ago, and definitely from 6 million years ago. So for the vast majority of time, we were eating we didn't farm at all. There was not this high consumption of crops. So what happened then was farming allowed us to stay in one place. And I think it was actually almost a reaction to humans at that time, because there's also this huge decrease in megafauna. So we're talking about large mammals that they started to go away, most likely because we overhunted and killed them. But they dropped off, and so then we didn't have these huge troves of nutrients anymore. So I think the reaction was farming, and it wasn't like one human did this. It was just like over generations, this is kind of what happened. We started depending more on plants, and so that was a huge